Hi. Hey guys, how are you? We're joined again by Father John Whitford. This is season 3. We've got Demos and Milos today. And what we're going to talk
What's up?
about is homeschooling and we're just going to kind of go through these topics and discuss them in an open panel. But the first thing that I think I want to ask, and we're going to start with, is homeschooling. Father, why do you think it would be a good idea for an Orthodox Christian to homeschool their kids?
Well, things have gotten way past the point to where the public schools are an option that is a very safe one for parents. It used to be that in America, public schools were essentially Protestant parochial schools, and the Roman Catholics had their parochial system, and then the public schools used taxpayer money to provide the Protestants with parochial schools, but they taught Christian morality and along with other things. And that's no longer even remotely close to being true. So today, your kids are likely to be taught from a very early age that they might uh, be the wrong sex trapped in a body that really doesn't align with their actual gender identity. That they might, be furries. There's some limitless number of genders that they might pick. And Also, they're taught things like critical race theory. They're taught to hate their ancestors, to despise their own country, and a
Yeah.
whole host of things, and certainly to despise their faith. And they're taught that that if you don't accept homosexuality, for example, or all these other um, alphabet soup kinds of things, that you're going to be that you're a hater, you're a bigot. And so when you
Yep.
have children that get immersed in that from a very young age, and particularly when most parish priests don't ever talk about this from the ambon, um, so they don't even know that there's an opposing view in many cases. The chances that a child's going to go through that and come out the other end a pious, right believing Orthodox Christian is a pretty small one.
hmm I personally work as a teacher in a public school, um, in middle school, and even as low as 12 years old, these things are taught already in public schools. Um, I cannot say too much because I don't want to lose my job, but um, you see, that's how serious it is. Because we have like Purple Friday here, where everybody wears purple to support homosexuality and everybody that's gay, and now the gender stuff is being pushed as well. I can see that creeping into schools here in the Netherlands. Not as much in the U as in the US, I think, but um um I haven't had an instance where I had to teach that stuff. I personally would refuse on the ground, but I'm definitely a supporter of homeschooling, even though it's not even possible uh in my country to homeschool. So that says a lot.
Yeah, I would say that in countries where it's in their representatives to change the laws, in the United States, it's becoming increasingly popular. It used to be a very small minority of parents that homeschooled. When my wife and I were homeschooling our kids, it was becoming more popular, but it was still um, seen by many people as sort of an oddball thing to do. But there's a lot of families in my parish that are homeschooling their kids. As a matter of fact, we have a homeschool co-op in our parish that meets once a week right now, and they've been doing that for this is going to be the third year that we've done it. And we have a lot of families in the parish participating. And so I think this is the best way to go, because even private schools are not necessarily the safest place to go. I know in Canada that you have sort of like the mainstream public schools, and then they have Catholic schools because of their arrangements they made with the French Catholics. But the Catholic schools are, while they're a little bit better than the public schools, they're still pushing this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And
but
so it's go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just in the United States there are lots of religious private schools that are getting weak on this stuff. Plus, when you put your kids into a private school, even though the school itself might be fine in terms of what they kids that have different kinds of stuff, schools, private schools, and curriculums. Whereas if you're homeschooling and you participate in a homeschool co-op in your parish, then that means that your kids are making friends with other kids in the parish, and you have a lot more control over what happens during a child's day.
Oh, definitely. I do think Orthodox schools exist though, especially in Australia, right, AD? I mean,
There
Carl?
are a couple of Orthodox schools in Australia, but not so many at all. And to be honest with you, they don't okay, not all of them do a good job of instilling Orthodox values. It's like a secular school with the Orthodox title slapped on, if that makes sense.
So do they have like priests teaching and stuff, or?
Some of them are better at that than others. Yes. It's good
Yeah.
that they kind of okay, so basically they're like how schools were when like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, which is better of course than right now, but it's still not the ideal, if that makes sense.
So yeah, homeschooling is then better when done right, of course. Father, what would you say to those people that are doubting it, that they're saying like, you know, my kid won't learn any social skills, it will be like socially awkward, stuff like that.
Well, the thing is, the social skills they're going to be learning in the public schools today are the kind of skills that you don't want them to have. The idea that children that are homeschooled are not going to know how to interact with people is just proven wrong by when you examine kids that are actually going through homeschools. I have two daughters. My oldest daughter tended to be a little bit on the shy side. So if that was my only child, you might have said that she proved that stereotype. But my youngest daughter is a very gregarious person, and she just recently got elected as the co-chair of the National Young Republicans. So
Oh wow.
she knows how to communicate with people, and she never saw the inside of a school until she started going to college. So it's and when you're homeschooling your kids, the thing is, the children that are homeschooled tend to spend a lot more time interacting with adults, and so they tend to actually mature faster, and they've been shown to do way better in college than kids that go through public school. And so the socialization that they get in a homeschool environment is the kind of socialization that you want them to have.
And I guess that would socialize also in church
Right.
with
Yeah. I mean,
people their
if you
age.
have your kids involved in church on a regular basis, every time they go to church, they have time after the services to play around with the friends that they know. And in my parish, even on Saturday night after the vigil, we've got families that are hanging out for quite some time after I leave because their kids enjoy playing with each other. And on Sunday afternoon, it's quite a bit longer. Sometimes, you know, our liturgy usually ends around 11:15 or so in the morning. Then we have a meal and we do Sunday school. But sometimes it's 3 or 4 o'clock, and it's even gone to like 5 o'clock. And my wife finally has to start telling people, "Hey, it's time to go." but but people enjoy each other's company, and it's good to let that be the means by which your children are being socialized, rather than in a public school environment where you've got kids showing each other pornography on their smartphones.
Yo,
I think
I,
that
I
if you get the kid and you like remove them from all social, because this is what people think, that when you homeschool the kid, because they don't have morals and values, they don't send their kids to church anyways, so they don't get that interaction with other kids their age. So then in that case, you're going to end up with a socially awkward kid. Why? Because they're not socializing at all. But the difference is when you've got some kind of community that's outside of school or outside of the workplace, when you get older, then it's not like if you don't go to work physically or you don't go to school physically, you haven't completely killed your social life. The main concern that I wanted to bring up, though, is regarding actual education, like mathematics and English. And for lots of parents, they're not actually well versed enough in all of these topics. So how does Like you might have a parent that's really good at maths or really good at English, but all of them at the same time. Usually, and speaking for myself, I'm not good at every single subject that can be taught at school. How do you get the kid to get a well-rounded education in all of these areas at the same time with homeschooling?
Well, with a co-op, one of the reasons why you have a co-op is that you have some parents that have skills in certain areas, and so when they get together, they'll teach those subjects. But the other thing that you can do is there are online programs that you can get your children involved in where someone else is doing the teaching if you felt really weak in a particular area. But if we lived back during the Soviet period, you obviously wouldn't have the option to homeschool. But the thing about the Soviet education was that you got indoctrinated by the communists, but you actually had an education. But if you go to the public schools in the United States today, you get the indoctrination without the education. And so an average public school kid is not really getting that much that is useful. They can barely read, they can barely write, and they can't do math on their own without a calculator. And so I think almost any parent can do better than that. and the thing of it is you can do that, and your child will still go to church when they're an adult, and they'll marry someone of the opposite sex, and you'll have kids and grandkids. So you can't do worse than the public schools right now. But there are ways to compensate for weaknesses that you might have, and that's working with other parents and using online material. But also, there's a lot of good homeschool curricula that are designed to make it easy for parents to teach the subject. And so I don't think you can do much worse, and it's certainly worth doing. My kids, there's things that I wish that we'd have done a better job of. There's life gets in the way sometimes. Like when my kids were being homeschooled, my father-in-law was very often in the hospital, and because my wife and her parents are from China. My wife speaks English. You can hardly detect an accent anymore, but her parents could only he could speak it passably, but not well enough to where you'd want him talking to a doctor and relying on his English, understanding what the doctor was trying to ask him and passing on accurate information back and forth. So my wife was usually having to be there to translate. But thing is, one thing my kids got to see when all that is they got to see here's how a child when their parents get older is supposed to be supportive of their parents. They got to witness life in action and how a family is supposed to help each other out and the kind of devotion that they're supposed to have to each other. So and my kids, I think, got a good education, and certainly in some areas it was better than others, but compared to the kind of stuff I see from public school kids, I don't think they got hurt any. There was a girl that was almost the exact same age as my older daughter, and they even looked like they could be related, and she lived right around the corner, and her parents were Catholic, and when she was old enough to go to the public schools, that's where she went. My daughter was homeschooled. Well, by the time that girl was in high school, she thought she was a man trapped in a woman's body. And she's been dealing with that ever since. When she got out of high school, she kind of bounced back some, but there's still some residual issues. Whereas my daughter got married, she married a man, she has 2 kids and another one on the way. And and she speaks a couple different languages, so I don't think she's hurting. I'm pretty happy with the results. And like I said, so my younger daughter seems to be doing pretty good. So, and I've just not seen. I've heard of cases where parents really just sort of, and you're not really doing your kids a good, any service by that. But that's, I would say, an exceptional situation.
Why not go private
Father,
schooling? Why not just do private schooling? What's the difference? So you said public schools versus homeschooling, but we didn't discuss private schooling. Why can't you just send your kids to a private school?
Well, private schools are an option. You just have to be careful about it because, like I said, at least in the United States, a lot of times parents will take their kids who've already been messed up in the public schools and put them into private schools. And so now you even though you're maybe going to a very conservative Christian school, that's the kid that's going to be showing your kid porn on his smartphone. So that's a problem. The other thing is when you don't have kids in any kind of formal school, they are not peer dependent. They're more concerned about what their parents think than they are about what their peers think. And particularly when it comes to the issue of things like smartphones and what you can do and can't do online when you're homeschooling, and particularly when you have them interacting with other kids that are very conservative in your parish that the families usually are making similar kinds of choices to you. You don't have this thing, well, how come everybody else has a smartphone and I don't? Well, it's a lot harder to make that argument when they're going to public school and everybody really does have a smartphone. But if you're homeschooling them, that's going to be less of an issue. And I think smartphones are a very dangerous thing to be given to kids before they get to be very mature. And I think computers as a whole are overused for kids in terms of their education. A kid's way better off learning how to do math with a pencil and a paper than they are learning how to do it with a calculator or anything like that.
I agree.
So what about parents like me in the future, for example? Like I don't have the option to homeschool. What do I do?
A terrifying thought, truly.
Yeah.
It is.
I think you have to look at what your options are and make the best of them. But, if I live in a country that didn't allow homeschooling and if the public schools were in indoctrination centers like they are in the United States, I think I'd be looking to try to get out of that country, quite honestly.
I see. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm a
By the
teacher
way,
myself, so
Milos,
homeschooling would be nice. What?
Milos has been waiting to say something for a while now. So
Milos can say anything he wants to right now.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
By the way, Father, do you think we will ever get to that point where we have all public schools at the level that they should be, educationally wise, and from a personal standpoint of that they're completely fine with children to educate them in that way?
Certainly possible, and I think that we should try to encourage our local public schools to move in that direction. I think Orthodox people should pay attention to who's running for school boards, for example, and make sure that they're putting people on there that are trying to provide the best possible education for kids. It's kind of hard to see it getting fixed short of very radical changes. Now, one thing that's happened in some states, and I'm hoping will happen in Texas, is that they are talking about doing, and they already have in some states done it, what's called a voucher system, which is basically a parent is given a voucher and then they can take that voucher to a public school if they want to, but they can also go to a religious school. Well, if you do that, there's going to be a proliferation of religious schools. And in that case, those religious schools would be a lot better. And once that became the norm rather than the exception, you wouldn't have this problem of kids coming from public schools that were already screwed up going into religious schools. You'd have a lot more people who did the religious school from kindergarten all the way through high school. So that would be probably the best solution that's on the table right now.
And also, as we are at the point of education, a lot of people also say that they need to redo the whole system of education because they've been talking about it since the 50s, that we need a new system around the world everywhere, but it still hasn't changed anything. And I heard some theories about it. Most people don't want the reasons why some governments don't want it changed, because it's more easily, you have more obedient workers in the end with that system. Would you agree with that statement?
That might be why they're pushing this, or maybe they're just trying to, dumb people down so that they're not able to think critically, and they're more likely to accept nonsense coming out of the government. I don't know. I mean, whether it's just incompetence, but I think the last thing we would want would be a worldwide solution to the educational system, because that would almost certainly be the worst of all possible worlds. It's better to have education controlled locally. So in the United States, I would say we should get the federal government out of the education process altogether, and do away with the Department of Education and let the local communities decide how they want to do it. And particularly if we have the voucher system, then basically you're allowing the free market to reward schools that do a good job and to punish schools that do a bad job, and schools that don't do a good job are generally going to disappear, because most parents want their kids to get a decent education. And the other thing about that would be good is, right now in the public schools, one of the problems we have is because they have gotten so hesitant to actually use old-fashioned discipline, which when I was a kid in the public schools, they were fairly liberal with. In Texas, they would give you a paddling on a somewhat regular basis, even for fairly minor
I wish I could do that.
infractions. But now they don't do that at all. So the problem is now you've got kids cussing out the teachers in the classroom and showing no respect, and in some cases engaging in even like lewd acts in the classroom because they can get away with it and they think it's funny. So how can kids get an education in that kind of environment? But if you have a voucher system, then basically a private school can say, hey, parents, if your kid's going to enroll in our school, we reserve the right to give them paddling. And if you don't like that, go somewhere else. Well, I think most parents would say, well, go ahead and give my kid a paddling. I want him to get a good education.
Well, out of my own experience, most parents get mad at the school, not at their kid anymore, when they do something wrong.
Exactly. My kid can't do wrong.
And that's an unfortunate direction our society has gone, because when I was a kid, it really was the case that the last thing you wanted the school to do was to call your parents and to tell them that you were misbehaving, because then you'd get it when you got home too. Whereas now you've got kids going home to their mom and saying, hey, they gave that my teacher was mean to me. And then the mom goes down to the school and gives the teacher a hard time. But, the thing is, if you have a voucher system, then a private school can just say, hey, look, you don't like it, go somewhere else. This is the way we do it here. And I think the result in the free market will take care of a lot of those things.
Definitely.
And also, I think with that system, the trust can get back from the parents to the school and vice versa.
Right.
And also, hopefully, another big problem that I think in many countries is there are not enough teachers, or the salary is too low. And that's how you get a lot of bad teachers as well. They lose their motivation for it, the passion for the job, and everything goes more downhill.
Oh yeah. Being a teacher, sometimes it's so mentally draining. You're more of a police officer nowadays than
with no
really
authority.
educating.
A police officer with no authority.
Yeah, basically. It's really mentally draining. I'm speaking out of own experience, because the kids get crazier every year. I'm not gonna lie.
I don't know what education departments are like in other countries, but I know back in the late 80s and early, like 1990, when I was in college, my wife and I became friends with a Chinese woman who was a graduate of Beijing University, which, if you know about the competition to get into Beijing University, that this woman was a genius. Well, she went to this private Christian college and was getting a master's degree in education. And she was taking something like 16 graduate hours a semester or something. Maybe it was even higher than that. I can't remember, but it was some ridiculous load for a graduate program. And she said, these classes are fluff. She told me there was a class where at the end of the semester, the teacher said, what would y'all like to do for a final exam? And they said, well, let's have a party. And the professor, okay, let's have a party. So that was the final exam in an education master's program. Well, I think it used to be that to be a school teacher, you didn't get an education degree. You got a degree in something substantive. Like you might have had just a bachelor's degree that was sort of like a liberal arts degree of some sort, but it wasn't focused on education per se, because education programs tend to wind up becoming indoctrination programs, and they're not about content, they're about method. And the kids used to learn a lot more than they do now with the old-fashioned methods. My father only had an 8th grade education, and he was far more literate and educated than most high school graduates or even college graduates that you see today. And it used to be that if you had a high school diploma, that actually meant something. That was roughly the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. And now we just, it's almost gotten to the point where if you don't have a PhD, you're not considered to be really educated, because there's so much fluff until you get to the PhD. And even the PhDs in many cases are fluff. So we've just watered down education so badly that it's a shadow of what it used to be.
Well, it's different here. It's still very hard here. And the education in like colleges and universities is pretty good still here. I've seen American programs and they're a lot easier than in my country.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe that will happen here too, because I already see the like I'm a history teacher, so I teach history in middle school, and I can see what I'm teaching these kids, and I can see that it's a lot less than what I used to learn in middle school. So yeah, we're dumbing it down a lot, and
And a lot of this
real
is because
issue.
the attention spans are so much shorter, because they're so used to playing video games and scrolling on their smartphone all day. So this is another reason why that whole approach to child rearing is so bad.
Oh yeah, definitely.
People don't learn how to think. And this same Chinese woman that I told you about, she moved to California after she got her master's at the college that I went to, and my wife and I got to see her again when we went to the glorification of St. John of Shanghai, because she was in the San Francisco area. And she told me she was then working on her PhD in education. And she was telling us about a bilingual education class that she had. And mind you, she had a kid who was eligible for bilingual education in California. And when she researched it, she came to the conclusion that bilingual education doesn't work, because it actually stunts the education of a child. So she opted out of it. And when she wrote a paper in this class and argued why bilingual education doesn't really work, she wound up getting a B for the course. And she went to her professor afterwards, and like I said, this woman is a genius. She said, on what basis did I get a B for this course? And the answer was, well, you obviously don't appreciate the importance of bilingual education. So it's all about coming up with the acceptable answers, not about actually doing rigorous academic work. So it's terrible.
I remember in my first year at university, we had to write, pick topics on social issues. We had a reality and ethics class, and we had topics like abortion, gay marriage, or everything that's politically prevalent. And I intentionally picked abortion and argued against it, obviously. And I got a C mark, but the teacher basically in the comments completely went into me. The paper, in my opinion, and it was well written, but the teacher just was not having it. In the comments, completely kind of destroyed my arguments, as if it's like she's arguing with me personally, but you're asking me to present an argument for or against. So why is it when I go against that you provide all these comments, and then some other person that's, in my opinion, isn't as smart writes something that's like, oh yes, abortion is great, please do it, and then gives. Have you heard the I don't know if you're aware of the violinist argument. There's an argument for abortion where basically a guy is strapped to a violinist permanently. I'm just paraphrasing here, and basically the violinist is only living because he's plugged into the guy. And it's a very poorly structured argument. This is what if you bring that argument up, it's like in the comments you'd say, thank you so much for that insight, this is exactly what we need, so it's exactly what I saw at university. It didn't matter about the content of what you were saying, it just mattered that you were agreeing with the lecturer or tutor's personal opinions on the topic.
Yeah, all that's necessary to succeed in education or academia today is to hold the right opinions, which is why, for example, the United States government is run by a bunch of people who are totally incompetent, and they've gotten us involved in the war in Ukraine, and it's totally blowing up in our face. We used to actually have smart people who knew things that were making decisions because they actually had merit before to warrant getting those positions. Whereas we have instead now a bunch of kids who their parents have bailed them out of every problem they've ever had in their life. They got an Ivy League education, which on paper makes it look good, but basically they had a fluff degree because they just spouted the right opinions. And now they're making decisions that determine whether or not we get into a war where 500,000 soldiers on one side are dead already. And I think that they went into this war thinking, well, we're going to collapse the Russian economy and it'll all end well. And then that didn't work, and they've been flying by the seat of their pants ever since. This is the result. This is the result of that kind of ideological education, where it doesn't matter whether you actually can think, whether you can actually make arguments, whether you actually learn anything. It's just a matter of spouting the right opinions and not daring to say anything that's contrary to the narrative.
Oh yeah.
And I think also a big topic nowadays is, I remember growing up, the older people would tell me, our children get worse and worse every generation. And then the older I got, like in my teenage years, then they told me, oh yeah, the children now are no worse than your generation. And then it kept on going. And at the same time, mental health problems at young people and children, they started rising up as well more. So I'm thinking about with both of them rising, the main catalyst obviously is, in my opinion, the secularism that we have in nowadays world, that every society, no matter where in the world, strove more and more away from God, unfortunately, or almost every society. And I think, well, it can only get better again, like you said in the beginning, if we have those Orthodox communities around us of the faithful. But is there any way we could somehow help those people in the schooling parts, make them more aware of that, with the combining with the Orthodox faith?
What do you mean schooling part?
With the, what was the word? I'm sorry. My brain is scrambling. With the
Education?
with education,
People,
yeah.
people that work in education?
Yeah, with the education board.
Well, look
How
at
could we
me.
make them more aware that they need that back into the society?
They
in
need
the
to
school
become
system.
Orthodox themselves first. That's the way I think it has to work.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And we
how
can
do
certainly
make them
model
more?
the way things ought to be.
Hmm.
But I'll tell you one reason why I think we have mental illness rising in our society is it's certainly related to the abandonment of the Christian faith, but it's also because we have so many people who are living artificial lives. Before World War II, most Americans grew up on farms, and that kind of rural life where you're in a small community, you're connected to nature, makes for more virtuous people and more well-rounded people. Whereas when you have people who grow up living in cities, sitting in front of computers all day, not going outside, no connection with nature, no connection with God, everything's secular, and everything's just the mainstream entertainment, and then they get indoctrinated in school. I mean, these people, they're not being raised to be decent human beings, much less Christians. And so that's the result that we have. I went to Moldova a year ago, this past August, and it was the poorest country I've ever been in my life. But what struck me is that in the United States, when I go walking around, particularly downtown Houston, I'll have beggars asking me for money, even if I'm wearing civilian clothes, which I used to have to do when I worked for the state of Texas. And when I go to Russia and Moscow, I had this happen to me a lot there too, but I was wearing clerical attire there, so that was part of it. In Moldova, I kept thinking people were coming up to me and asking for money, and when they would have what they were saying translated to me, they were just asking for a blessing. And they have tight families, very tight extended families, and particularly the people who live in the rural areas. They're very connected to nature, and the church is the center of the village life. But even in the capital city, Chisinau, that's where I would have expected to have seen street people or beggars, and I didn't see any. And the reason why is because that's a society where the Christian faith is still valued. They still have a connection with the land, and they have a sense of honor and hospitality. Well, when you grow up in a society with all those things together, you don't ever get into a situation where you're so desperate that you don't have anyone to turn to other than strangers on the street to ask for help.
True.
Exactly, as coming from a similar culture as the Romanians or Moldavians, it's just like that. If you have like, or it's in general like that, if you have a tough life, you keep more in mind the family and the religion. As you have it easy, it's just unfortunate our human being that we look outward to materialistic things or to other like so-called fun stuff and forget the important things in life.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, cities are growing and rural lands are getting smaller and smaller, and villages are getting bigger, becoming cities. So it's slowly, all of this is disappearing. Well, at least
Of
here.
course. The big
Well, I
companies
think that a
can
lot
make
of this
money
could
off
be
of.
reversed, though. And a lot of this is the result of government policies.
Hmm.
In the United States, they had agricultural policies where the motto was "get big or get out." So they told all these family farmers, either you need to become big and start getting into the corporate territory, or else get out of farming,
That
because
sounds like something Stalin would say.
right. Well, the thing is, I think the government policy ought to be, let's have more people farming instead of having people on welfare benefits. I mean, right now they're talking about how because of artificial intelligence and robots and all kinds of stuff like that, that maybe we're not going to even need most people to have a job anymore. Well, maybe the best thing for the health of society would be to subsidize people to live on small farms and raise food, even if it's not profitable. It's certainly better than paying them to just live in a government apartment where they're just eking out an existence but doesn't have any meaning to it.
Well, it's going to be a lot healthier too. Like the food, everything is chemically processed nowadays. I heard on the news that 1 in 3 people are going to have cancer in the future. It's crazy.
That's another thing in Moldova that was amazing people were putting food on the table that they had largely grown themselves, and the food that they didn't grow themselves, they got in the market where other people in their area had generally grown it. And so the food tasted a lot better than it normally does in the United States. It was all fresh, and there was pride associated with it. I mean, these people really do, their sense of honor and hospitality was so amazing. In Moldova, if you're a guest in somebody's house, you don't stay in the guest room, you stay in the best room. And the people who are in the best room go stay in some other room in the house, because they feel this sense of an obligation to treat you as well as possible. We don't have that. We used to have something like that in the United States, and it's largely gone. And I think it'd be worth trying to recover that. Maybe everybody's not going to recover, but at least we can try. In one of the fastest growing demographics in the United States is actually the Amish. They tend to have something like 6 or 7 kids a family. They're buying up farmland all over the country. They used to be pretty limited to like Pennsylvania and Indiana and Ohio, but they've been spreading out all over the country. And in some areas they might wind up taking over demographically. I wouldn't say that we should live exactly like the Amish, but certainly we could maybe learn a few things from them and try to encourage people to. I mean, one thing in Moldova is even if people didn't make their living by farming, they all had, like, their whole yard was a big garden. So everybody had their hands in the soil. And I think even if you had a job where you were some sort of a computer nerd and you telecommuted, but if you lived out in the country and you had a garden and your kids grew up learning how to work in that garden, they would wind up being a far healthier kids and adults than what we're getting right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Saint Paisios said the same thing, to have a little garden so you can, make everything yourself.
Yeah.
Mhm. I agree. That is having a farm and all that stuff. That's the best life possible.
But see, here's the thing. I think we should go into. We've talked about homeschooling. We've talked about having gardens. So I think the question is, what comes next? Basically, after you've homeschooled the kid, what's the aim? What do you want them to pursue as a lifestyle or a vocation, whatever it is? Where are you trying to herald the child into? You want them to stay in the church, but what's the point of providing them this education? If you can just give them a spiritual education, why give them a foundation in logic and mathematics and English? What are we trying to get them to become? That's the question.
Kids that are homeschooled and actually learn things and learn how to be respectful and learn how to show up for work and not back talk to their boss make model employees. My younger daughter used to get into it with my wife all the time because she'd say, you need to clean your room, you need to do the dishes and all that. Funny thing is, when she actually started working after she moved out of the house, she had a supervisor. She was working at a Clinique counter for a while in a mall, and her supervisor asked to meet her for lunch, and she thought she was in trouble, and she was actually trying to talk her into becoming a supervisor because she said, you're the first employee I've ever had that when I told you to do something, you just went ahead and did it. So all those arguments with my wife paid off. But those are the kind of employees you want. And the employers today, the problem they have is it's almost dangerous to hire people because you could get sued because you fire them, but they're worthless employees. But besides that, if I had a son, I would probably encourage him, if he was inclined to do it, to learn some sort of a blue collar trade, because we, in the United States at least, have been encouraging everybody to go to college, which means the value of a college education is a lot lower than it used to be. But you can make a huge amount of money by being a welder or being an electrician or being a plumber. And there's a shortage of people to do that. And they actually, there's a lot of illegal aliens that are doing that kind of work because there aren't enough Americans to do it. But that doesn't require that you sink $100,000 into a college education either. And a lot of times I've been told by people that work for companies that are along the ship channel in Houston, where there's a lot of chemical plants, that a lot of those places are so desperate for people with those skills that they'll pay for them to get the training so that they can then work for them. So you're talking about investing maybe 6 months to a year of training and then being able to start a life where you're actually making a really good living. Well, a kid like that could actually go ahead and get married when he's 19 or 20 years old. But with the college option, they're still paying this ridiculous debt that they've accrued and are never in. The kind of jobs they're getting don't really provide them a decent living in many cases. So it's hard for them to ever get out of the house, start a family, because the cost of living is so high.
Exactly. If you're going to go to college, you have to do something that's useful also. There's no point in getting debt for a degree that's not actually going to make you enough money to pay back the debt. Like, we know gender studies is a completely pointless pursuit, but I'm talking more about something that sounds flashy or sounds like it's smart, but still doesn't give you the money you need, right? So pursue something in college that when you're pursuing it, when you finish it, you can pay back what you pursued in the first place.
Right.
Or learn a craft and then go to college.
Exactly. So one of those
That's
two.
what I did.
Right.
You
Because
know,
we have
if
a
I
different
could,
system where you can do an apprenticeship. You can start it with 15, and it usually takes 3 to 4 years. And you can even do during that time your A level, so you can apply to universities, or you do it after that. So then you go to university, let's say with 2021 or something like that. It takes way longer like that, but you can also do that way.
you won't have student debt.
Yeah, you won't have any debt and have some money on the side as well already.
If I could do everything over, I would not have been to college. I would just learn a craft like you did. But I'm too far into it now, so I cannot quit anymore.
Yeah.
The unfortunate reality, but you know, I was young and everybody told me, "Oh, you need to go to university, otherwise you won't get a job," which is total all right, I don't want to swear, which is totally not true.
Well, in my case, I really actually appreciated university. What I didn't appreciate was every time I go into campus, someone's handing me flyers to come and like join the Socialist or the Communist Party at university, or to support, the LGBT society.
Well,
Like, I
they're
don't
breeding grounds. They're breeding
exactly.
grounds.
And I like education. I like learning. There's nothing I loved more, but I did not like what's in between going to classes. That's the
Right.
issue.
Especially in Greece, the breeding grounds. They had a law that the cops were not allowed to enter university grounds. They changed that now, but it's just for that reason. Like anarchists, communists could just hide in there and just spread their immorality with no limits. Fortunately, that changed now, but yeah. So they're using it as breeding grounds because young people can get influenced very easily. I watched Oppenheimer lately, and it was also shown in that movie that university was being used to, get communists out of those young students.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely maybe if you could maybe do like a home university study. I know that's possible here. I don't know about the US.
It is. Matter of fact, you can do an entire bachelor's degree from a Christian college where you wouldn't get the indoctrination. So that's what I would recommend to a kid that wanted to go to college if there wasn't a decent college nearby.
Is homeschooling like in the high school years? Is that possible in the US?
Yep. In
Oh,
Texas, there was a state Supreme Court decision back, I think, in the early 80s that said that parents had a right to homeschool as long as they had a course in good citizenship. And they never defined what that course in good citizenship entailed. So for me teaching my kids to read the Bible and teaching them about orthodoxy was their course in good citizenship. And no one ever came to inspect what we were doing anyway. Now, in some states, they're a lot stricter about that. But in Texas, it's you pretty much are left to do what you want to do.
sounds like a good place to be then.
That's right.
Well,
I'll think about it.
I think this deterioration in the ethics at campuses is all to do with deterioration in ethics in general. That's obvious.
Right.
But something that I think doesn't get brought up enough is it's not that ethics is becoming something it's never been before. No, I think we're actually just returning to pre-Christian morality. And we're forgetting the fact that our entire university system, our legal system, everything our society is structured on, our moral system, is all Christian ethics. Then Western secularism basically comes and stands on the shoulders of Christian ethics and says, look what I've done. And then proceeds to use an axe and chop away the roots that it came from. So
And
Or
the
is-
shame of it is when they're successful, that winds up undermining the entire basis of having a Republican form of government, because you can only be free if people are basically moral, decent people. If you have a society where people are not decent and not moral, then you have to have a strong government to make them do the right thing, and so therefore you can't have freedom.
Yeah, exactly. There was a moral experiment we did, where if you gave someone a ring that makes them invisible, would you do the wrong thing? They had a survey at my university, and shockingly, like, the majority of people said they would. See, that's the thing. If you don't believe that there's any actual consequence from your actions other than other people getting you in trouble, then when no one's looking, you're going to do the wrong thing. That's the sad part of removing God from the equation is there's no ultimate accountability for anything that you've done.
Right. And I believe it was in the book The Possessed where Dostoevsky had a character say, if there is no God, all things are lawful. And
Yeah.
that's impossible to argue with. I've had people try to argue with me, but there's really no basis for morality once you say there's no God, because if we're just highly evolved animals, then that means that killing 1 million people is of no more moral significance than if you pour gasoline on a fire ant mound and set it ablaze. There's no moral reason why one is bad and the other one is good.
That is one way that we're seeing, is that removing God completely. But now on the other end of the spectrum, and this is going to tie into what we said at the start, is they're pushing for a one world religion, because people are realizing that you can't remove God and then expect people when you're not looking to behave. So why don't you leave God there, but break down the barriers between religions and support our faulty morality using God? So why does the Pope, for example, why did he bless gay marriage? Or why are these different religious leaders doing all sorts of very shifty stuff that directly contradicts what their faith should be teaching them?
Well, unfortunately, you have a lot of people who call themselves Christians that just want to be liked by the general society, and our society has reached a point to where a majority of people think that saying that homosexuality is a sin is bigoted and unkind. And so, unfortunately, the Pope is caving in on that. The bad thing for us in the United States, the Roman Catholics are the largest single Christian group in the country. And so, as long as they were standing firm on moral issues, they actually provided some protection for the rest of us, because it'd be hard for the government to start treating smaller Christian groups as bigoted haters when the largest Christian group in the country was taking the same position. But if they're caving on homosexuality and then eventually they cave on abortion, the day could easily come where they say, well, look, these Christian groups that are against homosexuals and against abortion, they're no different than an organization that's promoting hate against black people or something like that, or advocating the murder of people. So we're going to take away their tax exemption and take away any protections that they have under the law that are given to religious communities, because they don't meet our standard of what it is to be a religious community. So it could make things very ugly for the rest of us.
Well, you have some bishops, like I know Bishop Strickland. I appreciate his stance on a lot of things, but he's a Roman Catholic. And the issue is ultimately with their paradigm, even though he's a bishop, he's not the Pope. So he can't actually do anything of consequence.
All their bishops are essentially vicar bishops to the Pope. That they don't, and none of them have the same kind of authority that a ruling bishop has in the Orthodox Church.
Exactly. And why do you think they want this one world religion in general? Why break down the barriers between what Catholicism obviously historically does not teach, like homosexuality is fine. Why are they breaking down these moral barriers and these barriers between religions?
Well, I think it's part of a globalist agenda. That they basically don't want people who take positions that run counter to what they're trying to do to society. Like in the United States, since the current president got in the White House, he's allowed 7 million illegal aliens to cross the border, and it's clearly on purpose. And that's not counting all the legal immigrants that are coming to this country. Well, what's going on is clearly that they don't like the fact that a significant percentage of the American people don't support the things that they want to do. So they figure if they just pump in enough people from the outside, they can dilute the votes of the people with those opinions, and are also trying to undermine conservative Christian groups. And literally, our government doesn't even make a secret about some of the stuff that it does, but a lot of this is done through foundation money, which is closely associated with the American intelligence community and the State Department, like George Soros. But to give you an example, there's a website that had an article that I think they got like $100,000 grant from the U.S. State Department because they wanted them to provide pro-democracy information, and particularly about the Ukraine war and stuff. So they're just bribing people to spew their talking points. And Public Orthodoxy is a website that promotes all kinds of crazy crap that's not got anything to do with orthodoxy. You look at that, they translate their articles into several languages. If you've ever been part of a nonprofit organization, most nonprofit organizations don't just have money all over the place to spare to pay people to translate stuff. You're depending on volunteers usually. They're getting their money from some place that's not friendly to what the Orthodox Church has always believed. That this stuff is it's an intentional effort to undermine the Orthodox Church, but it's not limited to us. They've done it already to the Catholic Church, and they've been doing it to a lot of bigger Protestant denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention. Even the denomination I was raised in, the Church of the Nazarene, you've got people who are pushing this kind of garbage now. And a lot of it, you can trace it back to foundation money that's promoting this stuff.
Ordamites.
Order.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, in conclusion, homeschool your kids, parents. Homeschool them.
That's right.
They'll be a lot better Orthodox Christians and people in general.
Well, I think
And build a farm.
yeah, build the farm, build the garden.
Build your little
My dream
garden.
is to have a vineyard. Make my own wine.
Girl. In an ideal world, yeah.
I have to feel for it. Maybe one day.
I think
Ah,
I think one last thing I wanted to just skim over before we end is just Nicaea 25. I don't know if you've seen, Father, but there's this like council that's being pushed for called Nicaea 25, where they're trying to like commemorate the Great Schism or something. Or Nicaea, sorry, Nicaea. There, it's called Nicaea 25.
Yeah, they're trying to undo the Great Schism by celebrating the 17th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, and the Ecumenical Patriarchate, or Patriarch, has already invited the Pope, and the Pope has agreed to show. And a lot of people have speculated that this is where they're going to announce some sort of a union. And I would say the smart money says that's exactly what's going to happen.
oh.
So what
Unfortunately,
happens-
the U.S. State Department has a lot of say in what the Ecumenical Patriarchate does. And this is not just conspiracy speculation. This is documented. A lot of stuff from the 50s and 60s, and also WikiLeaks, has shown the connection between the U.S. State Department and the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And so they do what the U.S. State Department wants them to do. And I think that the U.S. State Department likes the idea of bringing religions together and having them all celebrate the rainbow flag together. And so that's what's they're trying to push. The good side of it is, I think, for sincere Christians that are not Orthodox, people who desire to serve Christ, they're making it a lot easier for them to see that they're in the wrong church. And so I think you're going to see even more of an influx into Orthodoxy than we've already seen. Particularly, I think what the Pope announced today is going to cause a lot of traditional Catholics to say, you know what, I'm out of here. Infallibility, my rear end. This guy is a heretic. I'm gone. And so I think you're going to see a big move.
But what happens when then they look to the real church, they look to Orthodoxy, and they see that Patriarch Bartholomew, just respect the title, what when he's doing like much the same thing, what are they gonna?
Well, I think we just have to educate them that we don't have a pope, and the papacy has an appeal because it's nice. You have an efficiency when only one guy is calling the whole shots, but the problem is when that central authority becomes corrupted, as it has, you don't have any means to fix it. Whereas the Orthodox Church doesn't have that kind of a central authority, so that means that there's lots of ways to correct erring bishops, even if it's just to cut them off from communion. But hopefully it doesn't come to that, but I'm afraid that's what's going to happen.
So what happens to the faithful then? All the faithful that are under the ecumenical patriarchate, if he signs this document, where do they go? What do they do?
I think a lot of those people are going to say, we're out of here. And I think a lot of their clergy are going to say, we're out of here too. And certainly a lot of their monastics are going to say that.
I'm pretty sure the Church of Greece won't like it either.
And the Church of Greece is not under the ecumenical patriarchate, although because they're both Greek, they tend to want to support the EP. But
Yeah.
I don't think that they're going to go for that, at least anytime soon.
And I'm sure the other patriarchates will have some opposition to, especially Jerusalem and Moscow, of course.
Certainly,
But
yeah.
All we can do is pray. I think all we can do is pray.
Do you think hypothetically he'd actually just receive an excommunication or a breaking of ties from the other patriarchates, that they'd have the guts to do that?
I think that if he actually goes into union with Rome, I think you're going to see that happen. Now, the thing is, there are some local churches where you might see a division, where there's some parts of those people that say, hey, we're all for that. But the people who are not all for that are going to wind up staying in communion with the people who actually believe in the Orthodox faith.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, on that depressing note, I think thank you, Father Father John, for joining us today. Really, these were topics that I think they get talked about a lot in all of our friend groups, our circles, but no one actually has spoken about it that I've seen online enough. And people need to consider that there's not just one path to getting where you want to go. So ultimately, homeschool your kids, send them to a school, send them to an education system that they're learning values that you actually support. Go for either a trade or go to college and get something useful. And with regards to what's coming with the secular world, well, Christ tells us that we are not of this world, and the world's always going to be against us. So stick to your brothers and sisters in Christ, and with God's grace and mercy, we will make it through this, like we have in many persecutions before.
Right.
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Father, for being on again.
Thank you.